Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I see people are still coming in, so I'll give it a minute before we get started. Just as always, we'll be in this holding pattern for a few minutes. For those of you that are already here, please feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. Okay, and I think I just enabled the chat for everyone, so apologies if you weren't able to access it before. So we have Jennifer joining us from Houston, Texas. We have Denise joining us from Boise, Idaho. Awesome. And I did just turn on the auto captioning, so if you need that, hopefully it works, but if you aren't able to access it, please let me know. Awesome, I'm glad it worked. So we have Charles joining us from DC, Sarah joining us from Silver Spring, Claudia from Michigan. We have AJ joining us from Wisconsin, Lindsay, one of my fellow colleagues, joining us from Kingston, New York. We have Sloan joining us from Columbia, Alvin joining us from Indianapolis, Mary from Wisconsin. We have Josephine joining us from Massachusetts, Miriam joining us from New Jersey, Venus from DC. We have a lot of folks joining today, really exciting. We have Regina from Ohio, Chris from California. We have Dr. Bambi joining from Georgia. Hi, Dr. Bambi. And then we have Dinah joining us from Douglass CLT. Thank you for joining us today, Dinah. And then we have George joining us from New Jersey as well. Hi, Crystal. Crystal's joining us from McKinney, Texas. We have Marissa joining us from New York. I'll give it about another minute or so for folks to join. And we have Bill joining us from Greenbelt. We have Christine joining us from New Hampshire. Awesome. Cool. I'll go ahead and get us started now, but thank you everybody for sharing where you're joining us from in the chat, and feel free to continue sharing. So again, I'll go ahead and get started. So for those that I haven't met before or haven't been to one of these webinars before, my name is Sid Betancourt and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm housing advocacy organizer with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And you're currently joining Tenant Talk Live, just so that you know you're in the right place, where we provide opportunities for residents to connect with NLIHC and one another, share best practices, and learn how to be more involved in influencing federal housing policies, as well as leading in your communities. And so today's topic is on community land trusts, which I'm super excited about. They're also known as CLTs, so you might hear us referring to them as CLTs a lot through this presentation or this webinar. So I'll give like a very brief definition, and it won't be all encompassing, and our guest today will kind of talk a little bit further about it. But CLTs are considered nonprofits that are often community-led, that work to maintain long-term affordability of developments such as houses, apartment buildings, and land. And that's, again, a very simplified definition of CLTs, but our panelists will expand a little bit further today and provide some information on their experiences as well. And so today we'll be joined by two community land trust experts. First is Tony Hernandez, Director of Technical Assistance at Grounded Solutions Network, and Silvia Salazar, Board Member at the Douglass CLT that is located in DC. And we'll provide some time for Q&A closer to the end of the webinar as well. And I'll save some time at the end of the webinar to do kind of like an annual, what I'm gonna try to make an annual feedback survey for you all so that we can continue to kind of grow and learn from each other as we improve this webinar over time. And before I get started, I just wanna go over some general logistics, housekeeping that we do every time. So this session is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you have a friend who can't make it, or if you have to leave early, we'll make sure that it'll be up there in full for you. And please make sure to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions, but of course you're always welcome to use the chat to share your thoughts. And one important update that I want to make sure that you all are aware of ahead of time is that if you are signed up to the coalition's emails, you may have noticed that there was a new e-blast that goes out every Friday now titled The Connection. And so this e-blast will now contain all of the recap materials from every NLIHC call that week, including Tenant Talk Live. So instead of seeing a recap email sometime around Wednesday or Thursday, you'll see the recap and all the information with the resources, the links, the chat, and all that stuff on the connection this upcoming Friday. So if you're not receiving NLIHC emails, please, please, please let us know so that we can make sure you're on our listserv and you can get that recap information, because I know a lot of you follow up with me about making sure you have the recording for the webinar and stuff. And also, if time allows, we would love to invite some folks from the audience to participate during the call. We just ask that you stay on topic as much as you can with today's theme and make sure that you take a step back if you've participated a lot, just to give space to others to offer their thoughts. But that'll be enough for me, and I will now turn it over to Tony Hernandez. Go ahead and take it away, Tony.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sydney, for passing the mic. Thank you all for having me on this webinar. It's pretty cool. I love looking at all the names in the chat and where you folks are from. Alvin, I see you out there, brother. I saw your name, Harold Simon. If it's the Harold Simon I'm thinking about, I pray you're well, brother. It's been a couple of years. I'm really psyched that folks are making time to learn about community land trust and understand it. I'll go on a little bit about myself and show you some slides to help folks understand kind of a really quick crash course on CLT 101 that covers a little bit of the history and the potential of what community land trust can do. Again, my name is Tony Hernandez. I currently work for Grounded Solutions Network as Affordable Housing and Technical Assistance Director. And my job is to lead a team to promote shared equity housing models throughout the United States, where there are communities that are looking to build affordable housing. And under that shared equity housing umbrella, community land trust is one of those models that is very popular and folks want to know about. And so a little bit about me. I was born and raised and continue to live right now in Boston, Massachusetts. My parents both are from Puerto Rico, and I was born and raised here. And my parents had no more than a 10th grade high school education and made way to the United States to try to provide a better life for me and my brothers. There are three of us. And so in my career trajectory, I was, as I mentioned, born and raised in Boston, went to Northeastern University, got my bachelor's and my master's degree in architecture with a concentration in urban planning. So by training, I'm an architect. I worked for an architectural firm for about 13 years. I practiced architecture all over the United States and managed really big projects, had the blessing to be able to manage pretty big projects. And I got to a point in my career trajectory that I was hitting a ceiling at the firm and either deciding to become an associate and continue doing that work. However, there was a tug in my heart where I felt I needed to do more community-like work. And so I was at a crossroads in my career trajectory. And at that point in time, I'll take one step back. When I graduated from Northeast University with my master's degree in 2001, just a year before that, I had an opportunity to buy a home in a community land trust here in Boston known as Dudley Neighbors Incorporated. I was blessed with the opportunity to have my name picked out of a lottery and to pick one of the brand new homes that they had just built. At the time, I'm working on my master's degree, living like a true grad student, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every day, managing my budget as best possible. But this opportunity of home ownership came about when I signed up to buy this community land trust home. And so in 2001, I was blessed with an opportunity to become a CLT homeowner. And so from 2001 up until 2013, while I was becoming a new homeowner on a community land trust, I joined the CLT board, served on the board for 13 years, 6 years as a member of the board, 7 years as the president of the community land trust board. During those 13 years, although I lived in a community land trust home, I served on the board, I worked for this architectural firm and got a chance to travel a lot of the country. When I wanted to shift careers and figure out what my next move would be, in 2013, an opportunity came up to become the executive director of this community land trust here known as Dudley Neighbors Incorporated. I put that in prayer, and long story short, I threw my hat in the ring. I interviewed for the role and was hired to be the executive director to now carry this community land trust portfolio forward and to grow it. When the opportunity came up, folks said, Tony, this is your opportunity to give away. The architectural skill sets, working for an architectural firm, understanding the industry, having served on the community land trust board for 13 years, understanding what the workings of a community land trust were, owning a community land trust home, everything was there for me for the taking to take advantage of this opportunity. And so I served as executive director for Dudley Neighbors Incorporated for 7+ years. And just this year, I turned the page and took on the director's role of technical assistance at Granite Solutions Network, with an opportunity to take the work that I've been able to do locally here in Boston to hopefully a national level, and to speak with wonderful people like you that have joined to listen to me talk about this story in particular about community land trust model. So that's kind of my journey, my trajectory of why I am here now and what's brought me here. I'm going to share some slides with you folks, and I'm going to try to move a little quicker so that I can leave room for questions, and hopefully I can answer those for folks if they have them. So let me just share my screen. Folks see the Granite Solutions network logo, I hope. If not, Sydney, please interject and let me know. But as I mentioned, I work for Granite Solutions, and so the excitement is that I now get to not only talk about community land trust models, but figure out how to bring lasting, affordable housing to as many communities as possible across the United States, especially to Black and Brown communities, and serving less fortunate, low income to moderate income families. This platform at Granite Solutions allows me to really engage. And so far, man, I've spoken to so many people across the country. And my hope is to figure out how to bring our tool set to these communities, to help these communities and organizations like yours figure out how to make the rubber meet the road, right? We have a lot of warm and fuzzy conversations in the world of affordable housing. I've had enough of those. I'm looking to figure out how to make the rubber meet the road. And so this opportunity at Granite Solutions is one that I'm excited about expanding on. Roots of the CLT. For folks that don't know some of the roots of the CLT, here's a really simplified mind map of where the CLT conversation came from. And I'm being sarcastic by saying simplified. The roots of the community land trust came from so many different sources and so many incredible people. Over the years, there have been numerous connections and conversations and pioneers that have led towards this formulation of what a community land trust is. And I'll get to the definition of that in a second. Sydney touched on it earlier, and I think she was on point with it. But as you can see, many folks have had their hands in the model. And even today, we continue to try to crystallize and define this equation to get to that affordable housing piece. And not only just the affordable housing, but to create it in a lasting way that serves in perpetuity and remains sustainable. The community land trust model was one that originated, of all places, in Israel. And it was known as the Moshav model. And so that combined individual homesteads and cooperative farming on leased land. And this is where the concept of the community land trust model originated from. And in this picture, you can see some of the pioneers in the community land trust work, known as Slater King, Bob Swan, Marion King, Faye Bennett. These folks, their DNA is all over this model. And today, someone like myself and like Silvia are simply just trying to carry this baton forward in a manner that reaches those less fortunate and that expands on the model and creates the opportunity that we're trying to create, that we desperately need for our people. The community land trust model was born out of a civil rights movement. In 1969, one of the first community land trusts in the country, known as New Communities, was established. And this was with the guidance and advice of some of these pioneers that I mentioned earlier. And New Communities ignited this trail in the United States towards the community land trust model. And you should check out their website. Check out, if you're taking notes, write down Arc of Justice, ARC of Justice. Look it up, check out the documentary. It covers their story. It covers the story of the charades. And it's an incredible story. And if you ain't inspired by that documentary, then I don't know what to say, but you got to check it out. And so New Communities established one of the first community land trusts in the United States. And today we have more than 300 community land trusts across the United States. As I mentioned, the community land trust, as it established, it was around the same time that the civil rights movement was active and ignited. And so the community land trust model essentials, where it's about involving community and giving community a voice, was in alignment with the civil rights movement and the opportunity to make change and to have a for the people, by the people level of movement that we still try to push today. Exponential growth in community land trust in the 90s, and we're getting it now. A lot of folks ask me about the community land trust model, and me, Tony Hernandez, the person, I will preach community land trust all day, but I will also be the first person to say that the community land trust model is not a one-size-fits-all cap. And so as I approach so many different people across the world, right, I need to understand what demographics they're working with, what the geography is, what the politics is. The variables in this equation change from place to place. And so sometimes the community land trust model simply can't work in a particular place because there are too many obstacles. And so these are the conversations that in my role now at Grounded Solutions, I look to unpack. And for us, the ultimate goal is to create lasting affordability of housing. And so how do we get to that place? And of course, giving power to the people is something that I'm all for. Community land trust exists in 41 states. That includes the District of Columbia and my island of Puerto Rico. What is a community land trust? I see your face, Sydney. I'm gonna wind up. Thank you for the nudge. What is a community land trust? A nonprofit corporation that develops and stewards affordable housing. We have in the portfolio that I manage here in Boston, we had community gardens, we had civic buildings, commercial spaces, and other community assets like playgrounds and things of the sort on behalf of the community. So my job was to gauge what the community wanted to see. And then once I got my marching orders as director, I'd go to work and figure out how to align the developers, where to find the funding, who to talk to at the city level, to figure out how to align the planets and the stars in a manner that would bring this vision to a reality in our community. And as you can see in the picture, the house is, in this case, the house is owned by someone like me. I bought the home, But the land that my house sits on belongs to Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, the community land trust. What marries the house to the land is what we call a ground lease. And here in Boston, the ground lease that I've signed along with the paperwork to purchase my home is good for 99 years. And so while I'm leasing the land out for the next 99 years, I know that the land belongs to the organization. I can never sell it at market rate. There's an equity formula that puts a cap on the appraisal value of the home. And through my orientation, I understand that I was given the opportunity of home ownership. However, there is a slight cap, right, on the appraisal value, and so that if I decide to move on, that the next family has the opportunity to be blessed by home ownership because it remains affordable. I hope that's understandable. Perpetual affordability. Based on what I just described, the goal is to lower the price initially, right? We can talk about that shortly. And if the homeowner decides to sell, then the price remains low at a resale opportunity. And the goal is to bring that into cycle over cycle over cycle to preserve the affordability of the housing. Here are some before and after shots of some of the parts of our neighborhood here in Boston. In 1987, Alexander Street looked like this. As a result of community organizing and the community land trust work, it looks like this. I'll take one quick step back for dramatic effect. This is what it looked like in 87. We move forward into 2015, it looks like this. Back around the same time, notice the triple yellow decker off in the distance, in the field in front of it. That site looks like this today. And there are community land trust homes surrounding this entire park at the moment. And so as you can see, the power of community organizing can make change. And so I share this story to let folks know that it can be done. It's just a matter of how you organize and how you move in the space. I thank you. My email is here if folks want to reach out and figure out how to expand on these conversations and to figure out what I do further at Grounded Solutions that might be complementary to the work that you're trying to do in your neck of the woods and the families' lives that you're trying to change. Thank you so much for your time, and let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Tony. And it was really nice to see the pictures too. I think that really kind of gives it, like you said, that dramatic effect. But it was really good to see like the power of community like presented to us in a very tangible way. Is it okay if I wait to do the Q&A for both of you after Silvia, and then we can kind of have a conversation together? But thank you again so much, Tony. And I did see a question come in, so I'll make sure that we'll ask that afterwards, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to Silvia now to share a little bit about her experience at the Douglass CLT. Thank you so much.
Hi. Okay, hello, buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Silvia Salazar, and I serve on the board of the Douglass Community Land Trust. I'd like to acknowledge some colleagues from Douglass who are who are in this meeting as well. Ginger, Rumpf, and Dr. Dinah. They're both on, so hello guys, good to see you here again. I'm from, a little bit about me. I was born in El Salvador, and I came to the US undocumented when I was 6, and I grew up in LA. And those of you who are from DC are probably familiar with like how people move to DC to like, start their careers and kind of, explore the opportunities that DC has to offer. And in that process, I went to college, I got my degree, and I did a fellowship on Capitol Hill. And of course, when one is a student, one does not have a lot of money. So I was looking for a place to live. And I found an apartment building that was rent controlled, just 5 blocks from the White House. And I thought, okay, I'll move in there. The building was not in the best condition. It's, at the time it was 84 units, 7 stories, majority immigrant families. And the neighborhood was, it was definitely not the best neighborhood to live in, but it was affordable, it was rent controlled. And I was willing to put up with the housing conditions just to have an affordable place to live. And so in the process of living in there, what I learned was that the condition of the building and the maintenance that people received as tenants was not the same. If you spoke English, you got better maintenance. And if you didn't, you barely got any at all. And so over the years, like we started organizing just to improve the condition of our building. That's all we wanted, was just to have it fixed up and make sure that everybody had the opportunity to have, just a decent place to live. It took many years of organizing, and we basically started doing actions. We reached out to our landlord and saying, hey, can you fix up the building? We kept on receiving rent increases every year, which were actually illegal because you're not supposed to be able to raise the rent when there's an existing housing code violation. And it turned out that across the building, we had at one point about 300 housing code violations, and we had mold, we had a non-working elevator, and there were a lot of issues. And what the landlord was trying to do was basically, our neighborhood, Whole Foods had just gone in, and we could see that the neighborhood was about to change. The Starbucks started popping up, and the landlord offered us the option to buy us out. He was going to offer us the opportunity he was going to give us money to move. And that way he could flip the whole building into condos and then, cash in on the booming gentrification that was about to begin at that time. And of course, we resisted the condo buyout offer, and we said, we'd be happy to discuss condos with you after the building is up to code. And of course, that didn't happen. And there were, a lot more, and I'm really simplifying it here, but, it took families coming together who've been living in the building for a very long time, who basically were able to walk their kids to school, walk to the different places they worked at downtown. And we actually wanted to stay, but the landlord, again, would discriminate and try to harass us and threatened us with eviction. And, in DC, there's different, DC is known for its strong tenant rights history, and the laws very much support it. But those laws are only as good as our ability to actually use those laws and support the needs of tenants. And so we started using that, and there's a law in DC called the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It's called TOPA, T-O-P-A. And under that law, actually tenants have the right to decide what will happen to the future of their building, because, it's a very complicated history of that law, but basically tenants have the right to choose what will happen to their building. And so for us, we turned down the condo conversion effort, and we continued to organize, and the building fell into disrepair even more. And we continued to organize, and we actually got more creative. People in our building were talented. There were Mayan people from Guatemala who knew how to make mosaics made of sawdust, beans, and rice. There was a family who could play music, and he was a leader of a cumbia band. We didn't know, and so we incorporated those things into our organizing actions. Another family from Mexico, the mom, she baked pan dulce, she made pastries, and so that was her leadership. She contributed pan dulce at our events, and people knew the kids. We did a play about gentrification in collaboration with a nonprofit in DC called The Demise of Condozilla, in which the kids, first in the play, the kids pretended to be rats that were eating up the building, and then they pretended to be lawyers who came and defended the rights of the tenants. And then the happy ending at the end was that the tenants were able to buy their building and preserve it as affordable housing. That was our dream. We didn't know if it was possible. At the time, the building was being offered for $10.7 million, and we didn't have the money for it. But after a lot of lobbying and organizing, and I think more than anything, the fact that we came together as a community, and we organized health fairs. We had the fire department come out and check all the smoke detectors to make sure that there wouldn't be a fire in the building. And the landlord basically realized that nobody would want to buy the building because it came with a tenant association that was really active. And eventually he decided to sell us the building. And we got a loan from the city, a mortgage that we currently pay. And in 2011, we were able to buy the building for $9.7 million. The individual credit history of each person who lives in each unit was not a factor because the mortgage was made out to a cooperative we created, a nonprofit cooperative in which we all own shares in the building. And so people's, whether or not they had social securities or they were undocumented or what their credit history was not relevant because the building mortgage was in the name of the cooperative. And I know I'm simplifying this quite a bit, so feel free to ask questions along, when we do the Q&A. And so, 2011, we bought the building, we got the mortgage from the city, and we basically, were able to get some additional funding and fix it up, which was amazing. I think this year it's 12 years that we've been a cooperative, and it was very exciting to be one. And we actually have a say in terms of what happens in our building. When
Silvia, you muted yourself. There you go.
in the building, we basically decide for ourselves. We have elections every year for the board, and I currently serve on the board as co-president. So there's this leadership within our co-op. But one of the concerns coming out of that is that great, we have an affordable place to live. Same model of selling it at an affordable price because we got this loan from the city. But what's going to happen to future generations of families down the road? Will another family have the same opportunity to live in the building? And, with the gentrifying neighborhood being what it is, how can we make sure that our building is permanently affordable? And then enter into that, the Douglass Community Land Trust and that model. We have a covenant that is required by the Douglass Community Land Trust that keeps our building affordable in perpetuity. So forever and ever, our building will be affordable. And not only that, Douglass Community Land Trust has provided support in terms of how to apply the aspects of keeping the building affordable. What is affordability look like from one family to the next? But more than anything, and this is this not necessarily related to housing, but when the pandemic started, so many people in our building lost their jobs, and they really didn't know where to turn in terms of support and resources. And I have to say, Douglass stepped up and provided support with finding different programs and loans that would help people pay for groceries or even cover the monthly payments that we have to make. So out of that, I joined the Douglass Community Land Trust Board, and it's amazing to be able to be a part of building something that is in the future is going to benefit many families and not necessarily provide benefit to just one family who's going to flip a house or an apartment and make a lot of money. We're actually committed to becoming permanently affordable. And we are permanently affordable, and we have the support to make that happen. And so that's, I think, what is really interesting. I'm happy to take your questions. It's a bit simplified, but thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us, Silvia. I know you said it was simplified, but it seemed really comprehensive to me. But again, I think we're all kind of in the learning experience together. So Tony, if you want to join us again, we have 2 questions in the Q&A. And I think the first one was aimed towards you, Tony. This question comes from Sarah saying that her parents are thinking about shifting their house to a CLT when they eventually decide to sell. What good resources can Sarah share with them?
That is a great question, Sarah. I have encountered a few occasions with that very question here in Boston. We've had folks that like the model, and they want to figure out how to contribute back to a community. And they've said, upon our passing or some version of it, how do we leave our home in the hands of a community land trust so that we know that the affordability piece will live on? And so we haven't cracked the nut fully, but what we are engaging with is finding attorneys that are able to help develop the proper legal documentation that can be included in a will that would put the home into the hands of a nonprofit organization like a community land trust, who would then inherit the deed and have ownership of the land. And there's language that says, right, you can't charge X amount of dollars. It needs to be in line with the vibe that we're trying to carry with the community land trust. So there would be an equity formula that would put an appraisal cap on the cost of the home, on the cost of what rent can be, and you entrust that into a community organization like a community land trust, if that so be the desire. But it starts with some legal documentation. We approach an area where the pen is mightier than the sword, and so we need something in writing, and that's what I'm trying to figure out how to devise with attorneys to get to the place where folks can have that included in their will, so that the house gets passed on to an organization if they so choose to leave it in the community. That would be a start. And of course, pro bono legal work is the best one you can find in the nonprofit world. And hopefully maybe there are attorneys on the call, but if you have love for the affordable housing game, let's put some of that skill to work and help us devise a document that helps us capture some of these properties from folks that want to leave something behind and leave a legacy.
Yeah, and I'd like to actually add an example of that. We at Douglass were actually recently approached by a family who is not wealthy, and they're intentionally walking away from selling their house because it's in the Shaw neighborhood. It's a very gentrified neighborhood in DC, not far from Howard. But they've chosen to give up the profit they would have made on selling their house, and they want to pay it forward as reparations and actually convert their home into a Douglass Community Land Trust model property.
Yeah, and then Sarah just clarified a little bit in the chat saying that Sarah's parents just want to sell their home while they're still living, and if that would alter your response.
Yeah, I was just typing a response, Sarah. If they want to sell it while they're still alive, right, they can conduct conversations with the CLT and negotiate a price that works, right? A CLT can seek funding to purchase the property. And obviously they'd want to entertain selling the house at less than whatever the market value of it is, because chances are a CLT won't have that kind of money. I had plenty of opportunities when I ran the land trust here, and folks similarly wanted to sell to me, and I said, well, I've got to align the funding. I've got to find it somewhere so that we could afford to buy properties. And so I would arm wrestle a bit to figure out how to get it for the lowest price in order to fold it into the portfolio of the land trust. And from there, you can apply the ground lease and the covenant that from that point on will protect it in perpetuity, because now it's part of the land trust. And so your parents would have to negotiate, hopefully a price that this organization could afford and find the funding in order to purchase it and not put them in financial harm where it'll be hard for the organization to pay back that mortgage that they're going to pull, or that loan that they're going to pull to be able to buy that house. So it comes down to how much it'll cost.
So much, Tony. So the next question that I have queued up, I think was aimed towards you, Silvia. So in defining affordability, and I'm assuming this is within DC, do you use the federal definition of affordable? Using the average median income is a problem with DC because they'll lump us in with all the other counties that are surrounding the city.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges in terms of how you define affordability. And it's the area median income, and DC inherently, the DMV, that's Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, have higher income people who actually raise the area median income. So we get all lumped into one like AMI at the federal level. But one way to address it is to actually look at, either 80% of area median income, 60% of area median income. There's ways that you can define it so that it's actually addresses the people who are more needed in terms of income and being able to, have that need for affordable housing.
Yeah, and
Thank
one,
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
if I could quickly piggyback on that, it becomes a matter of, I just lost my quick train of thought. The question was around the area median income and figuring out, right, at what price you could sell. We have the same issue here in Boston, and we make the argument with the folks that are involved in determining those figures, in that our particular neighborhood, the area median income, the household income for the families that live in this particular neighborhood are not the same as the average across the city. And so you have to organize at that point and figure out how to get them to fine tune the lens that they're using to determine the cost of these homes. So that's part of the community organizing work that we've had similarly here in Boston. More than 25% of the families in this neighborhood that I live in, as of 5 to 10 years ago, didn't make more than $35,000 a year, $25,000 in a lot of cases. And so you make the argument, and you have to organize around challenging that area median income that they're using to determine the cost of the properties. And so the organizing piece really kicks in to make sure that whoever is controlling the gears is doing it in a manner that is fair to those that live in these neighborhoods.
That's like a really good point, and I'm glad that you're both kind of talking about your experiencing addressing that challenge, because I'm sure you won't be the last ones that experience that. So the next question comes from Claudia, who's one of our active advocates in Michigan, just asking if we're able to kind of like help in Michigan, I guess just kind of like in general in starting a community land trust. And I did get a question from Claudia in the registration kind of just asking like how can we start it in Michigan, especially with a state or like an area that might have an opposition to community land trusts.
I'll break the ice on a response to that. I've had folks approach me over the years, right? And they say, Tony, how do I start up a land trust? And I forewarn them, be ready for the response. It's not a quick and easy one, right? There are a lot of things that have to happen in order for a community land trust to become a community land trust and to have a portfolio. In Michigan, if you're looking to establish one, you want to start doing some recon. What neighborhoods are you looking at? Who makes up the neighborhoods? If there are empty parcels of land that you're looking to occupy and build housing on, can you engage maybe with colleges or universities and get students that are looking to do projects, right? And maybe have GIS skills that can help you comb through neighborhoods, identifying the parcels of land. Once you've identified the parcels of land, who owns that land, right? Is it foreclosed on? Is it city owned? And then try to, pick on the lowest hanging fruit of an opportunity to approach an owner of a parcel of land to buy it. But in order to buy it, you need to have a parallel conversation with a funding source. Is it a philanthropist? Is it a foundation? Is it the city kicking in subsidy dollars? Where's the money coming from to purchase that land? Once you purchase that land and it's owned by ideally a 501c3 organization, right? Do you have the developer lined up to build on it? Right? And do you have the community lined up to bring to meetings to talk about what the design of the house looks like? What do they want to see in terms of square footage? What does the architecture of the property look like? You want the community input for those moving parts. And so if folks are picking up, a number of pieces have to be moving parallel to one another in order for a lot of this, in order for the planets and the stars to align, a number of pieces have to move succinctly in order for some of this to get off the ground. Minus some of these pieces, it's just going to take longer. and it's going to be a little harder. And so you have to do the recon, as I call it, to understand what you're working with, understand your chessboard, right, before you start making moves, and comb through the neighborhood to understand what pieces you need at the table in order to get it popping.
Let me just share a little bit about what we did at Douglass Community Land Trust. What we did is we encouraged like one citywide community land trust, where the local community residents have control, and that's something that we are currently doing in Southwest DC for a project called Southwest Action. And one of the things that as a land trust that I would encourage folks to think about is that every project is different. And so what you have to look at is, how do we make sure that the people who are there currently, how do we not increase prices on them, and then also keep it affordable for people in the future? So it's that kind of balance between understanding the needs of a project, the community control, and making sure affordability exists for people who are currently living there and people who will live there in the future.
And one of the models that we live by here in the community land trust here in Boston is development without displacement. Every time I engage with an opportunity to increase the portfolio and bring property in and increase the assets, the question that I had to answer, and if I answered it wrong, then I knew I was moving in the wrong direction. Are we developing without displacing the people that are currently here and making them move out of the neighborhood because they can't afford to stay? That has to be a part of the equation as you look at these things, and understanding the folks that live there, how much money they're making, right? And we're just talking about housing, right? We're not even diving into the economics of job growth and the opportunity to increase economics to be able to afford those homes. And I know that we're surface level on this conversation, but there's more weeds to dive into, and not to say that it's impossible, because Dudley has an incredible track record. So I know it can be done. And I have the blessing to say that I am a community land trust homeowner and am able to have done so. And that's a whole nother conversation of what it affords you as a homeowner.
Thank you so much for both of you for elaborating on that question. I'm gonna try to get to some of the questions in the chat as well. But for any questions that we don't answer, we'll try to follow up with all of you on, if that's okay with both you, Tony and Sylvia. I'll go ahead and send you those questions so that we can get to them afterwards. But the first question that I see in the chat comes from Jennifer, and Jennifer asks, governmental entities have used eminent domain to grab land they wanted. Do these CLTs have more protection against eminent domain than owners of single family homes? And I feel like that one will kind of get to your point, Tony, that there's a lot of different, we can get into the weeds about a lot of different topics, and I feel like this one might be one of them.
I think there's a bunch of law tied to that question. For me, I can't think of an instance where eminent domain was used to do such a thing. I pray it never happens. Nonetheless, if I know that the city was looking, I would look at the legality, right? Because we have jurisdiction over ownership of the land, and it's a great question. Is eminent domain at a city level the ace of spades that trumps whatever, right? I would immediately look to our attorneys to really start digging into whether there's an opportunity to do that or whether we can block it, right? My ultimate goal obviously would be to protect the portfolio and the land and the houses. And so it's a great question. I haven't come across it having been done, but it's a total lawyer question that I'm probably gonna write down and ask when I have a conversation with our attorneys.
And in terms of my response, the legal protections are no different, but what we have is that, members actually decide what happens with the land trust. So, and that's the key to having an organized membership, is that the membership will decide what happens. And part of what we're also doing is educating elected officials in terms of what a community land trust is, and in terms of how things are worded to developers. And so it's complicated. It's a bit of a complicated answer.
Education continues to be the top piece in this community land trust work. I come across so many people that have no idea what a community land trust is. And so I've taken pride over the years to try to unpack some of this so that folks understand and walk away going, oh, that's what that is, right? But you got to educate the heck out of everybody, developers, lawyers, attorneys, banks. I've spoken to all of them, and I continue to speak to them and say, you got to understand what this is about, because at the core of it, it's for the people, by the people. And so if you're true to the game, that's what you got to keep at the table.
And I feel like that would be such a lovely way to end the Q&A section, but I'm just going to ask one more question before I close out the Q&A. And that one is just, if the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, is that available anywhere else outside of DC that you all are aware of? And I guess how that kind of plays into CLTs. I think, Silvia, you touched on it earlier, but if you want to elaborate a little bit further now.
Yeah, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. I believe that I went to Massachusetts to testify because they were considering having a similar law, so I know it's being studied. And I believe that in California, they're also looking at it in different places. But as far as I know, and not that I'm an authority on this, it only exists in Washington, D.C.
And TOPA is moving in Massachusetts. Thank you, Silvia, for testifying. It is a legislation that is moving. And we have a group here in Boston known as the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network. It's a kind of a think tank of multiple towns and community land trusts that meet monthly to continue to figure out how to unpack moving housing policy on top of building organizations that are able to do the work. But we're also looking to impact housing policy that touches on things like TOPA to solidify it and carve out a space that creates that opportunity.
Thank you both so much again, and for your thoughtfulness and for being very helpful in answering all of these questions. Again, I'll take all of the ones that we didn't answer and send them to you both so you can provide feedback on any that you may know the answer to. And again, folks, if you're joining us and you receive NLIHC emails, you'll receive the recap and hopefully the answer to those questions in the email that will come out this Friday. But I do have a few announcements to make. So we have a few minutes left and I'll try to make through all of the announcements. And Tony and Silvia, you're welcome to stay. If you want to answer some of the questions in the chat, you're more than welcome to do so. But again, thank you both so much for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge with all of us. I think everybody's been really grateful to have you both join us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So I'd now like to take some of the audience time to draw your attention to a feedback survey that we'll be dropping a link to in the chat. And it's kind of just a quick check-in with you all to see what topics you would like to see featured on upcoming Tenant Talk Lives, and if this webinar format still works for you, and any other feedback that you might have on Tenant Talk Live or the work that NLIHC does with tenants in general. So feel free to provide that feedback now. You can do it now or after the webinar, but just know that we're kind of all in this together. I think the overarching theme of this webinar kind of ties in with the survey, but it's about the community that we have here. And I want to make sure that we're making a space that fosters the growth between all of us as advocates, and that we're seeing the growth that we want to see in ourselves. So again, I thank you for your time, for filling out the survey if you do, and I hope I can read some of your responses soon. And so additionally, between Tenant Talk Live last month and Tenant Talk Live this month, we released Tenant Talk, which some of you may know is one of our semi-annual publications that comes out again with best practices for folks with lived experience with homelessness or housing insecurity. And this newest issue is called Housing is Built with Ballots, and we made it kind of voting related to match up with the midterms, and we do this about every 2 years or so. So we'll have important information on voter engagement, candidate engagement, and voter registration. And as always, we'll have renter perspectives as well from people with lived experience. And we'll also be featuring art from a tenant in California on the cover. And so the publication is now live on our website at a link that we'll be sharing in the chat as well. And then one last reminder for you all. So we did publish a blog post on the Homefront blog, which is part of NLIHC. And we're kind of hoping to do ongoing tenant blog posts on there. So the first one that we publish will be featuring cover art submissions that we had for this last tenant talk that I just discussed. And you'll get to see some of the art that was submitted and a little bit about the artists themselves. And then hopefully the next blog post will feature the cover artists themselves as well. But I just wanted to remind you all that if you're a tenant, a resident, or renter who would like to write a guest blog post about federal housing advocacy, we invite you to reach out to us and ask us like the guidelines that we have for that, and submit those or share those guidelines in the recap that we send out this Friday. But if you have any questions or are interested in participating as a guest author in our blog, please email us at outreach@nlihc.org, or you can reach out to my email as well. Either works. And then the last reminder that I have for you all is just please don't forget to join our Tenant Talk Facebook group. It's a really good place for you all to kind of connect and get to know each other and learn from each other and see like what resources you can share for one another. And Gabby just shared that in the chat. And again, thank you so much, Gabby, for joining us today and helping us out with the links. But I think that is it for today. I finished 1 minute early, but again, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Tony and Sylvia, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.